This is a GCSE presentation looking at types of diseases. In this presentation, we're going to look at a range of specific diseases, the symptoms, the transmission of those diseases, how we stop them, and we'll do some evaluation of the effectiveness of different methods of preventing disease. First off, a bit of a recap from one of the other presentations. Name the 4 types of pathogens, name the 4 ways in which pathogens can be transmitted, and then different methods that can be used to prevent transmission of pathogens. Pause the presentation now and spend a couple of minutes and see what answers you can come up with. So there are 4 main types of pathogens. You got your bacteria, your fungus, your protist, and your bacteria. You have 4 methods of transmission. You have direct contact, you have in water, in air, or using a vector. For example, a mosquito is the most common vector, but not the only vector. In terms of preventing transmission, again, there's a number of different things that we can do depending on the method of transmission that will prevent a pathogen from being transmitted. Again, you need to know all that information, folks. There are a number of diseases that you need to be aware of the symptoms, you need to be aware of how it's transmission, and you need to be aware of a couple of other little characteristics which I've mentioned at the bottoms. So the 3 virus ones are measles, HIV, and you've got what's called tobacco mosaic virus. You can get away with TMV, but you should know that it's tobacco mosaic virus, especially if you plan on doing the higher paper. You need to make sure that you know they're all caused by viruses, you need to know the symptoms of them, and you need to know how they're transmitted. We have 2 bacterial diseases. Again, you need to know the names of 2 specific ones, but there are others. The 2 specific ones you need to know are Salmonella, which is the food poisoning one, and gonorrhea, which is a sexually transmitted disease. You need to know about a fungus disease, specifically rose black spot, which is the little black spots that appear on rose plants and their leaves. And lastly, we need to talk about protists in the form of mosquitoes transferring malaria. So the first thing I want you to do is use a quick quiz, go back over the presentations, take some time to memorize each of the bits of information for each of the disease you need to know. And when you're ready, have a go at the quick quiz so you can identify which of these diseases is caused by which of the different pathogens. So pause the presentation now until you're ready to take the quiz. At this point, you've said that you're ready to take the quiz, so let's have a go. So TMV, tobacco mosaic virus, is caused by, well, that's kind of easy, it's got a V for virus. We've got rose black spot. Rose black spot is one of the fungi ones. It's also one of the few that you need to know that attacks plants, specifically rose bushes. HIV, again, we've got a V in there for virus. Malaria, a very common one in the exam, and it is caused by a protist. And we'll do a bit more malaria later on in another presentation. We've got the measles. Measles is caused by a virus, and then you've got the gonorrhea and the salmonella, which are both caused by bacteria. Now, if you didn't get 100%, what I would suggest you do is go back over the earlier part of the presentation with the characteristics of each of the different infections and pathogens, and make sure you keep going until you can do this 100%, and make sure you can identify all of the symptoms for each of the pathogens. So at this point, you should have gone through and you should have memorized how each of them is spread, and you should have memorized how to stop reduced transmission. That is covered in another presentation. It was also mentioned at the start of this presentation. Go back if you need to. They could give you a random example in the exam. They could give you a random disease. However, they would have to make it very clear, if it's not one of the ones listed in this presentation, they have to state what is the pathogen that causes that particular disease, and then all you have to do is say, well, if it's caused by that type of pathogen, it's exactly the same as the ones that you've memorized, and use that as a reference point to answer the question. Quick quiz again. So you were asked to go back and memorize all of the different symptoms of the different types of diseases. At this point, if you haven't memorized it, you need to go back and do it now. If you think you're ready and think you have memorized it, you can pause, read through each of the descriptions, and then match it to the relative disease. So stop the video now and have a go and match them up with the diseases. Okay, let's go through the answers. So number 1, recurrent episodes of fever and you're afraid it might be fatal. Well, fever is the malaria one. If we've got purple black spots on the leaves, the second you see about spots on leaves, you should be going for rose black spot. Fever and red rash again can be fatal. Well, a fever and a red rash is the measles. If we have a thick yellow-green discharge from a sex organ, in that case it has to be gonorrhea. The flu-like symptoms would be HIV. If again we're back to plants and we're looking at patchy leaves showing a mosaic pattern, we're talking about tobacco mosaic virus or TMV. Again, fever, abdominal cramps, vomiting and diarrhea is food poisoning caused by salmonella. So talk about the different types of diseases. Now we're going to look at the effectiveness of different methods of presenting diseases. You need to be very careful in your terminology. It's very easy to get confused in an exam and write down what you think is the right answer, but you've actually used the wrong wording. If you say the transmission has stopped, that means there are no new cases. Nobody is catching it. If, however, you say you've reduced the transmission, then you're saying that there are fewer people catching it as time goes on. So it hasn't stopped moving from person to person. There's just lower and lower numbers of people that are catching that particular pathogen and infection. They'll give you lots of tables, charts and graphs in the exam, and they tie it in quite nicely with this. They also tie it in with different methods of preventing pathogens being transferred. Again, go back and look at the work of Simmelwells and hand washing and the effect that had on deaths of newborns. But the main questions you need to ask yourself when you see any tables, charts or graphs around the immune system and infection, did it actually work? Did it work all the time? Did it work forever? Did it work just for a short space of time? And lastly, did it work on everybody? If they've only tested certain groups of people or certain ages or certain genders, then there are groups that it may not work on. So look for that kind of information in the tables and charts. Quick quiz, how does it spread? Again, at this point, folks, pause the presentation, have a go at the quiz, and when you're ready, you can restart the presentation to see how well you've done. Let's go through some answers. So we've got TMV. How is TMV spread? Well, TMV is spread by direct contact. Gonorrhea, again, sexually transmitted disease, so it's by sexual contact. HIV can be transferred by sexual contact, but it can also be through the exchange of bodily fluids, specifically the exchange of blood. Malaria is the unique one that needs the vector. It is the one that is linked to mosquitoes. Measles, well, measles is a virus, and viruses normally spread through droplets of liquid that are coughed and spread through the air. Rose black spot will actually be spread through water or wind. It'll actually spread through the air. And salmonella, you basically need to eat something that contains the salmonella bacteria in order for it to make you sick. Again, if you haven't scored 100%, go back to the start, look at the different cards on each of the different diseases and keep going until you can do this from memory every time. So in an exam, it is quite likely that they will say, here's a disease, how does it spread, how can we stop it spreading? And again, you got to go back over and make sure you've memorized the different ways in which transmission can occur and what method we use in order to stop transmission. If this is not in your head, folks, you are costing yourself marks in the exam. There will be something linked to the immune system or pathogens in the exam. You must make sure you memorize this information. And just to finish off, what we'd like you to do is write down everything you can remember and basically just see how many things you can write. Go back through the presentation again, change pen, add in extra bits and see if you missed anything out. There's a lot of stuff in here, but it is all memory. It's easy recall marks. It'll be 1 and 2 mark questions unless they bring in tables, graphs and charts, in which case you could pick up an easy 3 or 4 marks if you take the time to learn this information. So it's important that you do. Just to give you an overview, this particular slide you may want to print off. It may help you with your memory, but this is essentially all the information from all the cards condensed down onto one piece of paper. So it gives you the name of the disease, the symptoms linked to each of those diseases, how the transmission occurs, and any other comments that are relevant and may be worth knowing before you go into the exam.